Welcome to the Immersive Tech and Business podcast, where we explore immersive technologies, understand how they are redefining the way we work, and how you can stay informed and ahead of the competition. We'll explore how immersive technologies are redefining business, speak to industry experts who are building the future, and real people like you using these technologies every day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Immersive Tech and Business podcast with your usual hosts, Jason and Karen. And today we have a really interesting guest. We're joined by Hamza Khan. He is an author and TEDx speaker with books and talks focusing on resilience and leadership in a post-pandemic world. He is also the co-founder of SkillsCamp, a company that focuses on soft skills training. Welcome, Hamza.
Hello, Jason and Karen. Thank you both for having me. Really appreciate this. And hello to Jake working the boards in the back.
Today we're going on a really interesting journey, and we're going to start with a very open-ended question. So, Hamza, one of the areas that you've written and spoken a lot about is this concept of the future of work. And one of the lines you often use is the future of work is human. Really curious to kind of for you to unpack a little bit about what that means with all the emerging technology and focusing on that kind of emerging tech and education space specifically, but just to give us your view of the future of work.
I'm glad you asked that, Jason. And this is still relatively new for me in that I hesitate to take very strong stances. I like to exist in the gray. I like to keep myself open to all possibilities, all information. I'm a big believer in the Alvin Toffler quote that the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, they'll be those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. But in spite of that, if there's any strong point of view that is crystallized for me, at least as a result of the catalyst that was the pandemic, it's exactly what you said. It's the future of work as human. And, I can back this up in many different ways, but the one report that I keep on coming back to that just feels, to me, being immersed in this world, it just feels almost comical at this point, unfortunately. Gallup's State of the Workplace report has found consistently, at least over the last decade, that most employees are disengaged at work. I mean, the vast majority of them, upwards of 80%, are disengaged or actively disengaged in the workplace. And this has consequences for turnover, for productivity, for well-being. So the world of work isn't really working for most people. And I think we saw just how brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible our global systems were. Specifically in the supply chains, we could see the fracturing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic happening over there. We saw it happening across government, in culture, across the media. And I believe what we've seen as a result of this is that human beings are beholden to the values, beliefs, and priorities of our systems, of our corporations, of our governments, and not the other way around. And I believe, and there's many organizations that have demonstrated this very successfully and continue to demonstrate that when the opposite happens, when the needs of people are put first, let's look more locally at an organization. When a leader prioritizes the well-being, engagement, and productivity of their employees, the value chain then continues all the way down to the customer and then back to the level of profitability for the organization. In other words, if you take care of your employees will take care of their customers, and customers will ultimately take care of profits. And the same is also true for governments. The same is also true for nonprofits. There seems to be a hesitation for whatever reason, and there's many reasons why, but I'm trying to find a theory of everything that'll bind everything together. But there seems to be a hesitation to put people first, to prioritize the needs of people. And I think this is where this conversation is really interesting for me, Jason and Karen. The work that you're doing with Sozo Labs is in many ways about putting people first. The technology that you're adopting, pioneering, that you're helping to proliferate across organizations, I believe is fundamentally pro-human, human-centric. It's allowing people to transcend their circumstances, to allow them to tap into different events, processes, and organizations on their terms. And so I think I gave you a lot over there, Jason. I'm just rambling right now, but ultimately, I believe that the future of work is distinctly human. And I'm spending all of my days trying to find ways to articulate that, support that, and ensure, more importantly, that leaders across the world of all shapes and sizes, new leaders, on the track to promotion, and even senior executives are believing that and implementing that and breathing that spirit within their organizations.
That's absolutely fantastic, and I really believe that's an admirable challenge to take on. I think if I had to be very blunt, I would say leadership in the world today is broken, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. We see it all around us, from world leaders down.
Can I, and I appreciate that you're aligned with that, Jason and Karen. And I just want to ask you a question that I'm a little afraid to ask because it feels almost too simple of a solution to me. Put people first. The future of work is human. It almost feels pedestrian. It feels like something that we would extract from a nursery rhyme. From your perspective, is it really that simple? Or, do we have a massive blind spot here?
Karen, why don't you take this one?
Are you saying in terms of putting people first, or the future of work is human?
Both. I would say that both ideas are aligned. I think that putting people first is an operationalization of that idea that the future of work is human.
So I do think that the future of work is human, and I do think that we need to put people first. I think the challenge, and we've seen this through a couple of interviews that we've had and some of the research that we're doing, is part of putting people first means understanding their needs, meeting their pain points. And I'm talking internally in the working environment, right? And upskilling them to become the best person and the best version of themselves that they can be. The challenge, though, is that and it's all great and it's all rosy and we have it as like one of our values in these organizations and it's kind of fluffy. And then when it comes to the crunch, though, that training and that personal development just like goes out the window because they're like, oh, we need to reach targets and we need to do this and we do that. And it's so blindingly obvious that if you don't develop your people, you're not going to reach those targets because you've got people who are disengaged, disinterested, but it's a long-term investment, right? And we're so focused on kind of ticking these boxes. I always think it's interesting when there's a downturn and the first things to go are like marketing and people development, like the two things that you really need.
That you absolutely need. I mean, marketing being one of the only two functions of a business, according to Peter Drucker, the other being innovation, and then learning development, training, leadership development specifically, being the one that's going to get you out of the problem that you're in the first place if you're following some sort of like abstract causal loop. I'm so glad that you entertained that question and that you're on board with this. And I sense a lot of sincerity coming from both of you. And I say it's very validating because I feel like, I feel very lonely sometimes with the research that I'm doing, with the speaking that I'm doing specifically. It's just me on stage, opening my mouth for 45 minutes to 60 minutes and people nod and they smile and they clap and I get good feedback afterwards. But there's a small part of me that's like, this seems like almost too simple of a solution to what is an increasingly complex problem.
Well, being a big fan of complexity theory, systems thinking, it's when you look at it from a theoretical point of view, it is quite simple. When you start bringing in the realities of business, the ecosystems that business works in, the cultures that surround that business, the diversity of people in that business, it suddenly stops becoming a really easy and straightforward thing. And then, suddenly a very simple statement, saying the future of work is human becomes a very loaded statement because human means something very, very complex. And I think that's where a lot of leaders and businesses really, really, hit the wall a little bit when they know what they should be doing. And they know what the right answer is, but how they get there suddenly becomes a very, very complex task. Training someone and spending money on them is really easy, but what happens if you don't have that money? What happens if the person doesn't have that time? What happens if they don't have the motivation? There are so many factors at play, and I mean, just kind of touching on the great leaders are about people. I wholeheartedly support that. My interesting experience is very similar to yours. It feels a bit lonely to be a really strong people leader because the systems around you, and especially the commercial systems, sometimes rub up against that. And in my past, I've been told, you're too nurturing, you're too caring.
Wow.
And you need to be harder. You need to hold people accountable and be tougher.
Sure.
And it is frustrating because, in those situations, I reflect that I never ever had to ask somebody to do something, or I never had to ask somebody to go the extra mile. So, it's a great example of the realities that businesses and leaders and founders face, and why, as correct as that statement is, it's a loaded statement fraught with lots of complexity and challenge.
Certainly. And it's so interesting that was a criticism that you received earlier in your career, when now here we are, probably years, if not decades removed from that piece of feedback you received. That style of leadership is in vogue very much. Compassionate, human-centric leadership, open, transparent, and nurturing.
I'm laughing because this was 3 years ago, actually, wasn't
Man.
that long ago. So, yeah.
Wow. See, and that to me is disheartening, because I spend a lot of time researching the history of organizational development, leadership development, tracking it all the way back to the great man theory of leadership and its echoes through Robert McNamara and multiple industrial revolutions to the present. And I think that what has been the norm, I know that what has been the norm for most of the development of the modern organization is a sort of anti-human approach to leading. And I don't even like to use the word leading when I say anti-human. I believe that it's just management. It's a reduction of people down to metrics, an industrialization of work processes that puts the needs of people last. And when you think about the spirit of capitalism that has been evolving, at least through 4 iterations, where we still need to go, I'm glad now that we're talking about, ESG commitments and B Corps and putting people first. But I still think, to Karen's point, Jason, your points as well, that it gets lost in translation, the actioning of this idea. It's clunky at best. And I think the stressors, or the stress test that was the pandemic, revealed the extent to which people are not doing this. Leaders are not implementing a people first approach to leadership. Yeah. I'm still disheartened now. And I think this goes back perfectly to what you're doing at Sozo Labs. I'm still disheartened that too many leaders are forcing a return to the office, when we've clearly seen over the last 3 years and some change that people are happier, they're more well holistically, and they're just as productive, if not more productive, in hybrid environments, completely flexible virtual environments, if you will. And so to me, it just seems like a final gasping attempt to revert back to some old world conception of normal, when if you listen to the people, if you ask your employees what they want, it's very clear.
I think the challenge there is human beings, as much as we like to change, we can be quite resistant to change, and comfort is a big factor, and especially for leaders and managers. And I've always been fascinated, by people like Otto Scharmer and Peter Singer's kind of theories around change management and why we don't change. And it's often just the fear of being in that space of discomfort long enough to be able to see the change take on a positive effect. And often I think part of the problem is that these organizations just aren't giving themselves the time to see the change take effect, or even worse, the person themselves hasn't let the change take effect in their own kind of minds. Right. So even though everything looks like it's everybody's on board, this hybrid remote work is working, the leaders of the company still sit in these kind of rigid thinking patterns, going, well, I can't see that person at their desk. Are they really just kind of messing around? That that person's not very disciplined. How do I know? Yeah. So
it's disheartening, really. And going back to systems thinking, are you both familiar with the open systems theory?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I mean, for the listeners who might not know about this, real quick, basically organizations that are able to cross the chasm of time and thrive are ones that are meaningfully engaging with their external environment, taking information, using it to enhance the core of the organization, and then continuing that cycle. But closed organizations, closed systems are doing the exact opposite. They're not meaningfully engaging with the world around them. And you can be creative with your conception of what that system is. It could be a mindset of a leader. It could be a team. It could be an entire organization. Hell, it could even be a country or some facet of the zeitgeist. Now, it's fascinating that now leaders, despite 3 years worth of evidence, are still hesitant to meaningfully engage with the data. And I think that goes back to a lot of fear. I think people during times of stress, during times of crisis especially, tend to behave more conservatively. They go into survival mode. They become more protective of their resources. They're trying to buttress against future losses, or maybe they feel an insignificant reward following an investment of resources. So this is, this is a problem that needs to be solved, hopefully, in the best interest of people and, by extension, the planet.
So just coming back then to the question in terms of having discussed all of these challenges, what are you seeing as the role of technology and the effect that it's having on trying to overcome some of these perceived obstacles or perceived challenges?
I'm glad you asked. So I'm a millennial, and I think I was born into one of many golden ages of technology. I was very familiar with the internet, very familiar with modern gaming as it is, the transition from desktop computers to laptops, other mobile devices. And now where we are right now, this new frontier that I'm very excited about is the world in which you work, mixed reality, AR, VR. I'm excited by the metaverse. I'm excited about the future of gaming, the cloud. I do believe that these are sort of micro revolutions in terms of communication technology, and revolutions never go backwards. And I think that the thing that has been true since the very first communication micro revolution, which is oral culture going into the phonetic alphabet into the Gutenberg press, radio, television, personal computing, so on and so forth. I think the through line across all of this is openness, creating more possibilities for people to participate. And I get really excited, having done a lot of work in social media as one of these sort of quantum leaps in communication technology. That's where I cut my teeth earlier in my career, helping to open up colleges and universities across Canada to commuter students. And when you think about that concept, you think about people who had a barrier to access because they lived, an hour, 2 hours away from campus. What my team and I did is we built these robust, thriving online communities where they could feel like they were part of the Ryerson or University of Toronto or Seneca College community, whatever, what have you. I think it's where we're like at now is we're at the precipice. Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Karen.
No, sorry, I was just saying from what you're talking about, it almost feels like a democratization of that content and that access.
Big time. Absolutely. And I get very giddy with excitement thinking about what this could do for modern organizations if we enabled, not just allowed, if we enabled and empowered people to participate in organizations virtually beyond the ways that we become accustomed to during the pandemic. Sure, Zoom, Microsoft Teams. I feel like these are, these are proto forms of collaboration. Where we're eventually going to go, I believe, is, people are going to just put on a VR headset, whether it's an Apple headset, an Oculus Rift, whatever the case may be, some new innovation that allow people to participate and feel like they're in a physical environment. I'm really excited by that possibility. I just don't know how to implement it. And so as a leader, as somebody that's building a very open systems organization right now, for me, it's not a matter of if I'll integrate AR and VR into the work that I do. It's a question of when and how. And as far as the when is concerned, I feel like, I don't know, maybe tell me if I'm wrong over here. This is like asking a barber if you need a haircut. Am I a little late? Or am I early, or am I just in time? And then I'd love to hear from you about the how to implement this.
Wait, are we talking
I'm
about
glad you asked, Hamza. I'm glad you asked.
Yeah, I was just wondering, are we talking about VR, or are we talking about the haircut? Because I can probably answer on the haircut, Jason. I don't know if
let's go with the haircut first.
Definitely on time.
You don't need a haircut. You look spectacular.
Okay. You're looking great.
Yes,
looking
very
great.
well groomed. Yes. So my answer is it's never too late to start, but it's
okay.
It is. If we were having this conversation in 2016, I would have said absolutely not. The technology is still immature. if we were having this conversation in 2020, I would have said there are some early stage practical uses for the technology. And those would very much have been in probably marketing spheres. The reality is that XR technology probably started most in the marketing world, as a tool to kind of attract people to trade show counters and get people to, kind of like just little gimmicks and things to make your brand stand out, which I wasn't really a huge fan of. And at Sozo, our belief is that technology should have real value to the user, and there was some value there, but it was a lot of these applications were basically build once and then never use again.
Never use again. Yeah.
So into 2021, 22, and I think I did some really interesting applications as far back as 2018, 2019, and we did some pretty profound stuff back then. But one of the kind of limiting factors was the technology was tethered. So I remember having to go and do demos and presentations and lugging this massive desktop computer with me and this really clunky VR headset, and it felt like you were literally kind of carting a small mainframe around with you.
Wow.
Nowadays, the form factor of the technology, it's wireless, so you can just pick it up,
Right.
pop it on your head. You're in a virtual world. There's no constraints. You don't need expensive computer systems to run these platforms on. And I think this is the first time now where I'm seeing the price point of the technology has become consumerized, which means that it should
Nice.
easily be affordable for businesses out there and institutions like yourselves to start really embracing. It's a small barrier to entry. It's a small cost component to get a few devices and try stuff out. And the technology has got to the point now where I think that we're not photorealistic, unless you're talking about 360 videos, but I have a special place for 360 videos, and it's right next door to hell.
It's not a good place. Not a good place. Ixnay on the 360.
And I'll tell you why I'm not a fan of them. But
please.
They serve a very simple purpose, but people are using them, I think, in
the wrong way.
Invaluable
they're
wrong
like,
ways. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, they're like over cooking it. Yeah.
So then, in terms of the technology right now and where I think it should be used as a soft skills company, I think that we talk about it as an incredible tool for learning. And I think if I had to think about where this type of technology really, really shines at the moment, it's in learning environments, because there are still challenges to the technology. The first thing is you don't want a VR headset on your face for 4 hours. It's going to be uncomfortable, no matter how light it is. You're going to kind of feel it in its form factor at the moment. It's also just impractical because maybe with augmented reality you can get away by seeing the world around you, but in VR you are really immersed, and that's a good thing because it takes you away from the distractions of the world around you, and you can really focus in. And that's why we believe it's such an incredible tool for learning, because you're single-mindedly focused on the content that's in front of you. So in terms of people using it for online meetings, I think it's okay. It's a useful tool. It's a fun tool. We've done it at Sozo a few times. It loses its kind of appeal very quickly when you realize that you're not really fundamentally innovating the way that we exist with each other in a virtual world. Whether I'm looking at you now in a 2D versus whether I'm looking at an avatar of you in 3D, it really only comes alive when we are interacting with the virtual world. And I think that's where this technology starts to shine. So if we were trying to use the technology in practical ways, then it would be how do we use it where it's best suited? And that's why in learning we talk about a blended learning approach. Is VR is not a hammer, and we're not there to smash everything and go, everything must be in VR. There's a very niche place where VR lives. And if I had to think about it in terms of an office environment, it would be where, you're kind of collaborating and building stuff together, and tactile stuff. So almost like a design thinking type of environment where you're kind of building like, that Jarvis-esque kind of thing. I'm like taking this, like moving it around it, and I'm collaborating with someone in a 3-dimensional space. And I think that's where it really shines. But in learning, it really does, I think, come to its own, because in many scenarios, we see people still learning out of textbooks and still learning on e-learning sites where they're looking at 2-dimensional things. But think about it. We don't live in a 2-dimensional world. We exist in a 3-dimensional world with 3-dimensional objects around us every day. So shouldn't we be learning using the same experience, a 3-dimensional experience? And that's for me where VR really kind of comes into play. And there's so many factors. They call it the human empathy device, because our brains can't often distinguish between the virtual world we kind of live in these VR headsets, and the real world. And I've seen that play out in sometimes funny, but often like really impactful ways. One of the first things I ever built was a experience where we were trying to test people working to see if they could work at heights without experiencing vertigo.
Okay, interesting.
And there's been a lot of these solutions where, like, walk the plank and people go, ah, and spiders and people go, ah. But this again, was a practical application that was delivering real value, and it brought back a return on investment in the first 8 weeks of the solution. So it was something significant. But when we did the A/B testing, you could see right there that people could not distinguish that they were in a virtual world. They walked into a typical kind of office in a steel plant, the brown carpet that probably was put there about 30 years ago. The walls that probably hadn't been painted for 10 years. And you were standing on that floor. Absolutely.
Flickering.
And you could stand on that floor, and you could feel the dodgy carpet, and it was a bit sticky, probably.
Oh, wow.
And yet you go up in a lift you're not going anywhere, but in your headset you're going up to 190 meters above ground, and we ask you to look over and read a number off a building that's below.
And is it just visual, Jason, or is it like haptic feedback happening like through a bodysuit?
It is haptic. Well, it was pre kind of bodysuit. What we did is we worked with a bunch of engineers who fell in love with the idea of what we were creating. So cool. next thing we knew, they ended up creating a whole infrastructure installation for us, because the whole idea was you go up an elevator, you get to the top of this blast furnace, and then you have to do certain activities. So what they did is they created this whole structure of a floor where the floor would vibrate when the elevator started to go up. So you would feel the ground vibrate. When you got to the top, they had these fans that would basically those breeze fans that blow air in your face. But before we had all that cool stuff, we just tested it on people, and the people who had vertigo were on their hands and knees, crawling on the floor. They could feel the carpet under their palms. They knew that they weren't at 190 meters, but their brains refused to tell them that they were on the ground. Wow. And it's a fascinating thing to even experiment with yourself, is just go into a VR headset, you can download one of these free kind of experiences where you're walking on a plank, and try and step off it and see what your brain does to you. It will refuse.
I've done this for fun a couple of times.
Yeah,
I've got thalassophobia, fear of large objects in the water, namely sharks.
Oh, wow.
And so sometimes I'll just trigger an amygdala hijack by putting on a VR headset and then just simulating shark videos, and it is absolutely frightening. I mean, there are moments where I just have to physically remove it in panic because my brain is playing tricks on me.
Sounds like a regular Friday night.
I think, coming back to your question is.
I mean, I balance like the space exploration videos and doing spacewalks and walking through the Amazon forest. But I decide to shake it up sometimes.
Out of curiosity,
it's like changing genres in a movie.
If I have done the space experience and a shark floated past, would it incur the same type of response? Because
at that point, I've gone too far in the simulation.
Okay. Or you're
so
starting to watch Sharknado 5.
Hey,
could be
you know
a
what? That's it, man. What a time to be alive.
Absolutely.
This is I think the problem that is ultimately being solved here is one of presence and synchronicity. The ability to teleport. I mean, I'm having trouble right now with the graduate studies that I'm enrolled in. The campus is in Toronto, and for the pandemic, I attended courses virtually. Post-pandemic, they said, come back to campus, except I'm living in New York now. And so it's a logistical challenge. But as a learner, I was just as engaged. I was performing just as well in a virtual environment. And to me, it's a little heartbreaking because the very real possibility exists that I might have to withdraw from this program and opt for a school that has figured out how to engage me virtually. And many of them have. I, as an instructor, have figured out how to do this with very rudimentary technology like Zoom and Teams and Slack and other ways to connect. But ultimately, I figure where we're going to go is similar to, Jason, what you said, some sort of contraption, device, some configuration of technology that will allow people to, at the very least, participate in a way that feels like Ready Player One, where they have on a whole suit and they're walking on some sort of treadmill. And I mean, that's sort of the science fiction scenario that I can imagine that would be attainable in the near future. But I suppose, and I'd be curious to hear from you, both of you, which science fiction which science fiction world has done this best. To me, it feels like The Matrix has done this the best, where being in virtual space feels indistinguishable from reality.
I think it's again, it's a really fascinating conversation because it's fraught with a lot of ethical issues, and I think they touched on this in Black Mirror, where they had an episode where people were kind of starting to change their organic parts with machine parts, and
Westworld does this as well too, right?
Yeah, yes, Westworld does.
I think that's So my sense is it's inevitable, right? I mean, it's technology. I think we've kind of almost lost control, just systemically as a civilization. The pace of innovation and technology. There's no stopping it now. We might know about all of the pitfalls and dangers of artificial general intelligence and read these fantastical books about what happens when technology becomes sentient and realizes that we're parasites.
Just incidentally, did you hear about with Alexa? So if you request a song and you don't say please at the end, Alexa responds to you in quite a rude way. But if you say please and thank you, then she's like super charming, which just like freaks the pants off me. I just like.
Karen, can I tell you a funny story on that note? So I think 2 Christmases ago, nieces and nephews were running amok in the house, and they were just yelling at Google, or I think it was Alexa. They were like, "Google, play this. Google, you're so dumb. Google, this is not what I said. This is what I said." And my father-in-law had a moment where he sat the kids down and he said, "Speak to them nicely." And they were like, "Yeah, but it's just technology. It's just a robot." And he's like, "No, you never know. They might have feelings too." And I watched that teachable moment. The kids scampered off, and I'm like, "Hey, James, like, what happened over there? Like, that was really intense." He's like, "Dude, in the future, these could be our overlords, and I want to make sure that I'm on the right side of this." And ever since he said that, Karen, Jason, I kid you not, I have been so polite to I have Google at home. So polite. Even when Google gets things wrong, there's a part of me that's just like, I can't wait to replace you with ChatGPT. I'll whisper that. I'll be like, "All right, Google, thank you so much. Appreciate it. But you mind just turning off for the next 2 hours?"
You tried your best. You tried your best, Google.
I tried my best. There you go.
But it's interesting. I mean, just a bit of a departure now, but they have proven that even with ChatGPT, if you ask it things in a very polite and positive way, you will actually get better results than if you are quite abusive or curt with your tone.
I've noticed this, Jason, and not that I've been abusive to ChatGPT, but I find that when I'm much more patient with ChatGPT, and it's a great relationship that I have in that it's forcing me to be more clear in my articulation of questions and to be more sequential in my thoughts. The more patient I am with ChatGPT, the better results I get from it versus me just trying to use it like Google and trying to get lucky. This is really cool. And I wonder, guys, if we're going to look back at this conversation and the technology that exists in 2023, 10 years from now, and just think about how early it was, how seemingly primitive it seems compared to where we're going to be 10 years from now. And so I want to go back to a question that I asked a little while ago, Jason. If you had to situate my desire to integrate this technology into my work, where would you say I am in terms of the adoption curve? Am I at the crest? Am I at the peak? Am I off the chart? I have no idea.
I think in the consumer gamer world, we're starting to get out of the early adopter cycle. I think in the business world, we're still in the early adopter cycle, would be my guess.
This is good to know. I feel really good about this.
So I think if you would look across the board, you would see that less than 2% of organizations globally have really embraced immersive technology.
You're kidding me. Less than 2%? I was so off. I thought it was like 30 to 40% have adopted this.
I think a lot of them are starting to, and by adoption I mean using it in a true business sense, not experimenting, some skunk works kind of area of the business.
Not like a marketing gimmicky.
Yeah. And I think you'll find it's where there's, I mean, especially AR has become a very useful tool to give you contextual information in real time. I think it's been used in a lot of refineries and a lot of maintenance facilities because it's a nice way to walk around the plants and be able to get contextual information of that thing you're looking for. And if you're, for instance, having to do a maintenance check and you're looking at one different type of CO2 container to maybe a liquid nitrogen container, you could quickly at a glance see what the type of safety checks are that you need to do differently on those two pieces of equipment. And for virtual reality, it's very much in terms of hands-on practical skills training. I think it's found its early niche. And we do a lot of those types of simulations, how to fix diesel engines and brakes on semi-trucks, how to fix landing gears on aeroplanes and things like that. But where we're starting to see it take shape now is because VR is called the human empathy device, and because you're able to train in the 3D world, and because it is tactile. Even though you're using controllers, you're picking things up, you're manipulating things in the environment that you're in, and you're learning the same physical movements that you would use in the real world. The interesting place it now becomes a valuable tool is in soft skills training, because you're able to now take advantage of that empathy. You're speaking of AI. We're seeing the ability to create these experiences now. 2 years ago, creating an avatar was an expensive job. Hand stitching the animation to make it feel real was really, really expensive to do. It was even more expensive. It was probably the most expensive part of the process. Having to get voice actors to do the voice recordings and all of those kinds of things to bring this animated avatar live was a lot of work. Nowadays, we've replaced that by 3 AI tools that allow us to generate an avatar in minutes, to be able to animate it by basically shooting 2D video and having the 2D video translate into 3D animations, and then using AI tools, text-to-speech tools. And with ChatGPT now, and having just launched this API, the next logical evolution is to have you talk to a responsive AI avatar that's animated and have it talk back to you. And you can imagine how that's going to bring soft skills training alive.
I've got an idea I'd like to run by you. So Bailey and I were just talking about this yesterday. Okay. If you got to send me an invoice for this consulting, by all means. Bailey and I were talking last night about how we feel like we've arrived at the end of the keynote industry. We're both doing very well as far as public speaking is concerned, but it's still for the most part, an analog business where we have to physically travel to a location, stand on stage, say what we have to say, and then pray that people implement what we say. And her and I are thinking beyond that. We're thinking about how do we activate the learning, and how do we be proactive about this beyond giving books and coaching hours and consulting. We're thinking about taking the online portal that we've built for SkillsCamp and integrating some AR into that, some XR, I should say, into that. One example is this. One of the things I speak about is having better one-on-ones in which you're demonstrating humility, openness, transparency, understanding. And we have ways that we can demonstrate this. I'm wondering if there's a version of the training that could be built where a manager is talking to Jason, what you just said, this overlay atop the AI, and they go through scenarios. And they can get real-time feedback. They can see reactions change. They can see decision trees end in less than positive circumstances, or positive circumstances, whatever the case may be. That can all be built out. That map exists in my head, but to actually just execute it and turn it into a real simulation, that could be rich, because then you have the backing of the knowledge that we've shared on stage, and then you're integrating it and implementing it and rehearsing those scenarios in as close to real time as possible. Is that a possibility?
You've literally just described exactly where we believe VR fits. It's a tool that you can essentially use. It's okay. This is not okay. PG rated.
I'm just really psyched by this stuff. Yeah. Man. This is great.
So we see it as the perfect tool to reinforce learning. And in fact, the way I describe VR is it's the first tool in human history that allows us to offer experiential learning at scale, which is quite a massive statement in its own right. But the joy of it is that it is massively scalable. So the problem with speaking on stages is exactly that, is you're often speaking, you're limited by the time, the travel time, which is why more and more speakers are speaking virtually.
Cost.
Yeah.
There's only so many people who can attend. And it often becomes something that's inaccessible to most people, and often you're overwhelmed. I've been lucky enough to go to some of probably the most aspirational conferences, and just come out the end of it feeling, all I feel right now is overwhelm. I don't feel like I've learned anything. And it eventually sets in. You might kind of realize a few months later that actually some of the stuff did sink in, but you're never really able to safely practice what you've learned from any of those talks. And I think that's the kind of crystal clarity moment for me is if you're going to a course, you're learning something repetitively in a safe environment, but if you're learning something from a speaker on the stage, it's quite hard to go back and try and implement that, because you haven't really mastered those skills. So you're taking a big risk. And if you're not a very confident person, which a lot of people aren't, trying to practice that, you're going to get anxious, you're going to be nervous, you're probably going to mess it up the first time, and then that's it. I'm not doing that again. So now you can imagine practicing in an environment where you can do it 50 or 100 times
safely,
safely,
without compromising your social capital.
And one of my favorite lines to use is when you take a look at someone who has learned something in VR versus someone who has learned something from a textbook, from a video, from a speaker. I threw that last one in just because. The difference you'll see when the person who's learned in VR is when they apply it, you'll say it's almost like that person's done it before, and that's because they have.
They have.
Yeah. This to me seems like such an easy sell. Putting on my capitalist hat, I'm like, oh wow, I can go to any decision maker and say, when you work with me, you'll get the keynote. You'll also get this after the keynote solution, and it will drive learning retention by 30%, whatever the case may be. I just have to benchmark it against how much.
It's 75%.
75%? No way.
75% is learning retention.
Yeah. So there's.
I feel like we shouldn't publish this podcast.
We got all the stats.
Give me
we're loaded.
No, but
stats.
I'm saying, as somebody deeply competitive, I'm kind of hesitant to share this episode because some of my competitors might be listening and might beat me to the punch. But I think this is we're playing a positive sum game over here. Everybody wins. But sorry, Karen, I cut you off.
No. I was just going to say that there's the 70-20-10 model where you retain 10% through kind of traditional forms of education, 20% from chatting to somebody, and then 70% from fully experiencing that. That experiential learning, which Jason touched on, is where you really, really learn. But doing that at scale is very difficult. Whereas with VR, it's just absolutely seamless. And again, you can practice over and over and over. Your learning retention is 75%. So when you're listening to somebody on stage, yes, that knowledge is embedded, but probably just in your short-term memory, whereas when it's through this experience in VR, it's in your long-term memory and you're able to recall on that. And then it also boosts your confidence. And why is confidence so important? It's because you feel more connected to the material, you're able to play it out, and you feel far more confident in yourself and what you're doing and being able to give back to the business. And that's what VR has to offer. I think another thing around the analytics is that businesses are now able to see where their staff or their teams maybe aren't hitting, the specific goals, and being able to give them real-time feedback and say, in a really loving, nurturing way, maybe working at heights actually isn't for you, but let's figure out somewhere else where we can. And also thinking about, we've spent so much time and effort training people on X, Y, and Z, and they actually know what they're doing. What they don't know is ABC. And I think that's what VR has to offer through all of that really rich data that's coming out of it, and it's immediate.
Wow, it's more than just connective tissue in the organization. It's a complete, not even an augment. It's a new category altogether. This is exciting.
It's almost that we've come full circle, because when before the Industrial Revolution, even, think we used to learn through a wise mentor, someone who was practiced and experienced, and they would take on an intern or somebody, an artisan, and they would train that person up, and you would get like deep one-on-one
apprenticeships,
kind of,
exactly.
And because of scale, we've distanced the teacher, that experienced, wise kind of Gandalf type mentor, further and further from the person learning, and we've minimized the impact and value of education and learning.
Yeah.
And now we're starting to see a world where it's giving us an opportunity to maybe bring that back a little bit closer. It's just replacing the old mentor with AI, which is an interesting kind of new lens to look at it through.
And if I may, just lend some credence to that point about education being disrupted, and I can say this is somebody that's been working in the education space for just over a decade now. The traditional model is primed for disruption. I think it's the only industry that hasn't been significantly debilitated by digital disruption, but that is coming very soon. And I think I'm the perfect use case as somebody who wants to study, who's throwing money at the institution, but they're unable to meet my needs. And so I'm just saying I'm primed to receive any college, university, or other learning environment that will respect my desire to attend and participate on my own terms. I think the institution that figures that out is poised to capture a significant chunk of the market for global education. Forget about just a college or university in your hometown. You're talking about potentially 9 billion students.
Yeah, 100%. All right, it's been an absolutely fascinating conversation, and we've spent a long time chatting about some really deep philosophical things. I always like to finish the episode with like one key takeaway from our guest. And it's almost difficult for me to ask a very specific question because we've talked about such a wide array of things. But if you had, let's take a specific question, saying if you were speaking to a business leader who's sitting in front of you right now, and he was looking at this future of work being human, this immersive technology, the disruption in education, and you were to say, like, give him some sage advice, what would that sage advice be?
Ooh. And I would be willing to bet my entire life's work and savings on this advice that I'm about to share here. I think this is my reason for being. Revolutions never go backwards. And so where we are right now, this technology that we've been discussing in the last hour, this is inevitable. This is going to happen. The genie is out of the bottle. And so I think it is imperative that this leader changes before change is required or before it's too late. And I've seen this cycle happen far too often. There's a period of growth. There's an introduction, growth, and maturity. And then an organization has to decide, will it renew itself? If it doesn't renew itself and start the cycle all over again, it tumbles into the chasm of time that's littered with Fortune 500 and S&P 500 companies that thought, we don't have to change. Things are going well right now. So in sum, change before you have to.
Brilliant. Amazing advice. Thank you, Hamza. It's been an absolute honor and a privilege to have you on the podcast. I feel like I've had the time of my life. So it's been so impactful being able to have a deep, meaningful, philosophical debate with you. So I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
This was a lot of fun. I appreciate you both. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Immersive Tech in Business. If you found our podcast helpful, please subscribe. Subscribing not only keeps you up to date on new episodes, but it allows us to keep bringing you really great content. Seeing as you stuck around for the end credits, and this isn't even a Marvel movie, we have some free goodies to say thank you. See the links below to grab your free copy of our Practice Makes Perfect report and a free infographic about the power of VR for learning. You can also check out our Reality Bytes blog for even more useful information on immersive tech. And that's a wrap. See you next time.